Joining us on the broadcast, Dr. Arvind Kumar. He's the chairman of the Institute of Chest Surgery, Medanta Hospital. Thanks very much, Doctor. You're a busy man, I understand, but thanks very much for sparing the time and being with us. I want to, over the course of the next couple of minutes, just break down information for our viewers that will better equip us to deal with this air emergency as we continue to live in these dreadful times. My first question to you, what is the prolonged impact of exposure to air pollution, the levels that we are seeing in the National Capital Region right now?
Rishika, first of all, thank you very much. My hello to all your viewers and thanks to NDTV for having me on the show. My apologies for being a little late. I was with a patient in the ICU. Apologies. Your question, Rishika, is what are the long-term impacts of exposure to these levels of air pollution? Am I right?
Yes, I mean prolonged exposure, given the fact that this is now, 1 week and continuing of severe air quality. What is this doing to us, this prolonged exposure?
Okay, prolonged exposure. So,
yes.
So Rishika, when the levels are so high, even an acute short-term exposure is enough to damage our health seriously. And when that exposure to such high levels goes on uninterrupted for days and weeks, it's actually killing all of us, to say the least. And I'll tell you how. Let's start from pregnant ladies. So all those ladies who are pregnant and harboring a child in their womb, whether it is first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, all of them, the babies are getting badly affected. That's number one. The toxins which are going into the pregnant mother's lungs are getting absorbed into the blood and they are affecting the fetus developing in their wombs. Number one. Number two, the newborns which are taking births in the last 2-3 weeks, all of them have been exposed to about 25 to 35 cigarettes, equivalent of that, and I'm sure all of them would have had a swelling in their windpipe, swelling in their lungs, and then impact of these toxins on the entire body. All the children across the board, all the children amongst my acquaintances, friends, relations, neighbors, everybody is coughing. Many of them are on nebulizers. I myself have been, although I'm not an asthmatic, I'm not a so-called smoker. Still, last 2 weeks, I have been regularly taking my inhalers because I do feel choked when I'm outside. So these are all serious chest effects of so many patients who have been operated by us are now coming back with chest problems, bronchitis, pneumonia, asthmatic tendencies. And these are only respiratory effects. There are cardiovascular effects, there are neurological effects, and there are all kinds of other effects.
So you're saying that even short-term exposure can lead to devastating effects, and here we're talking about a prolonged exposure because it's not like 100%. The air quality is bad now. The air quality is actually quite bad through the year. It's only in the severe category now. Doctor,
it's only a spike.
Yes, for the benefit of our viewers, could you just explain what does severe air mean?
So we have these AQI divided into 0 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 150, 150 to 200, above 200, above 300, and above 400. So WHO say, and when you talk of AQI, AQI is a term which is it's a number which is derived from the value of 6 particulate and gaseous matter in the air. The main factor is 2 PM 2.5. So PM 2.5 is given maximum weightage. Other than that, PM10 and several gases, you have a formula by which you get AQI. But for all practical purposes, you can say AQI is almost the same as PM 2.5 because that is the most damaging of all the particles. So when you have such high levels of PM 2.5, anything which is more than the normal range is damaging, and higher the value, more the damage.
Right.
PM 2.5 is particulate matter, which is 2.5 micron. PM10 is particulate matter, which is 10 micron. There's something called PM1, which is 1 micron. And there's something called less than 1, which are called submicron particles. The value of these smaller particles is that the bigger particle 10 usually gets trapped in the nose or throat, does not go into the lungs. But PM2.5 and smaller than that passes the nose and the throat barrier, goes into the lungs, gets deposited there, releases the chemicals which get absorbed into the blood. So in terms of damage to the lungs and the rest of the body, it is 2.5 and smaller particles which are critical, which cause maximum damage. Apart from that, gases, of course, go inside and cause the damage. Rishika.
You've explained it really well. I think for viewers now who are going to be reading these metrics or statistics in the news, I think you have a better understanding of how it's actually impacting you. Doctor, my next question very simply is, who's most vulnerable? At this time, one broadly understands that, it affects children, elderly, etc. But who, according to you, is most vulnerable and most at risk because of the kind of pollution we're seeing right now?
So, Rishika, anyone who is breathing is vulnerable, but you asked the question, who's most vulnerable? So I will say small children, the newborns, the infants, the children. Why are they more vulnerable? So when we breathe, with our breathing, these toxins go inside. An adult breathes about 12 to 14 times a minute, but an infant may be breathing about 40 times a minute. So when you are breathing faster, you have that much more air going into your body. So if we have exposure amount according to your body surface area, the newborns, infants, children have far more volume of exposure than an adult. Number one. Number two, they have growing tissue. So when a chemical goes and attacks the growing tissue, the damage will be far more than the tissues of adults who are already grown up. So that's why children have worst effect. And the other group which is affected is the elderly. Reason, because their immune system, their resistance to be able to fight the diseases becomes low. So they have higher chances of pneumonia and other problems as compared to adults. But that is not to say that us, the adults, are not affected.
What about people with comorbidities?
Sorry, Rishika, I couldn't hear you.
I said, doctor, what about people with comorbidities? What should they do? You've explained very well how children are most vulnerable. But what about those with other underlying conditions?
Yes.
What should they be doing? What's the protocol?
So people who have any other comorbidities, for example, suppose you are suffering from diabetes for a long time, that reduces your immunity. You've suffered in the past from some cancers for which you might have taken some immunotherapy, chemotherapy, etc., which makes your immunity low. Suppose you are on steroids, you are on chemotherapy medicines, or you are suffering from any other disease, kidney disease, liver disease, chronic respiratory disease, any other disease that weakens that particular system. So most vulnerable are a group called COPD. So people who've been smoker for a long time, they have a disease called COPD where the lungs become weak. When a COPD person is exposed to this air, his risk of developing pneumonia and risk of dying from that pneumonia is many times higher than an adult who does not have COPD. Right. So very good question, Rishika. People with comorbidities are also at very high risk. Rishika.
Right. Doctor, the other thing that's dominated headlines is the fact that schools are shut. Now, many people argue that why shut schools when children are going to continue to breathe the same air at home? Is it safe for children to step out? What is the difference between the outside and the inside? Where do you weigh in as far as this argument is concerned?
Very, very, very intelligent and very pointed question, Rishika. I really appreciate the difference you are trying to make between a child staying at home versus child going to school. So let's say, what will the child? First of all, air inside the house is more or less the same as air outside, because inside air, outside air, when you open doors and windows, they have an exchange. Air does not know any boundaries. However, when you are close to main highways, roads, or any industrial area or industry or a fire burning place, the levels there are much higher than levels inside your house. Number one. Number two, when the children go to school, there are two places where problems occur. Number one, we know that the schools start in the morning, and the air pollution 24-hour variation wise, highest levels are between 6 to 8 a.m. in the morning, because during the course of the night, all these particles, etc., tend to settle. And the children are at the same height where the maximum levels of these pollutants are there. So when the children are going to school by bus, etc., they are exposed to highest levels of these toxins. That's number one. Number two, children are children. When they go to school, you can't expect them to just sit. They're going to run, they're going to play, no matter how much you try. Even if you close the play field, they will run from one class to another. When they run, their respiratory rate goes higher, 40, 45, 50. So they breathe that much more toxic air than they would have done if they are inside the house. So these two reasons expose them to higher levels of more toxins than if they stay inside the house. And that's the reason why schools are shut during this period, which of course is a knee-jerk reaction. It's not a long-term solution, because
it's a knee-jerk reaction, and it's definitely not a long-term solution. But you're saying that there is some scientific basis to keeping children indoors in the most vulnerable time when the air pollution is perhaps the worst. So, you know, it may be a short-term measure, but it is still something that has some scientific basis.
Rishika, it's very sad that for the last 8 years, this started in 2015.
Yes.
And we have had this problem occurring every year. And we've not been able to take long-term measures to prevent us from taking to these knee-jerk measures. It continues to be done every year. It's a very sad story.
Well, it is a sad state of affairs, doctor. But, you know, like I said, you're giving us real life hacks on how we can better cope. So I want to also ask you, what about those individuals who don't have the luxury of sitting cooped up at home or sitting, you know, in purifiers, people who are stepping out of the house? What should those people be doing to better protect themselves given the air quality?
Rishika, it's very, very difficult to answer this question for the reason that actually there is nothing that they can do except to pray to God that, God, I'm going to breathe 25,000 times in next 24 hours these air, which is inhuman levels of pollutants. Please prevent me. So what are the solutions available? Number one, if there is a highly toxic polluted area, maybe move away from there. But where will you go? Air is a continuous shed. It's the same everywhere. Masks are being propagated by people, but Rishika, the surgical mask which I'm wearing because I go to OT, or the cloth mask, doesn't help. N95 does protect you, provided you cover your nose and mask completely. You have a nicely fitting mask and you breathe only through the mask. It does protect you from particulate matter, but the gaseous matter still goes past the mask. So that's probably the only thing which a person who has to go outside for his livelihood can do to prevent himself from getting exposed. But mind you, he should avoid walking fast or doing any exercises, because otherwise you will feel breathless and you may even get choked. Never do exercise with your N95 mask on, Rishika.
So, you know, the other question that I wanted to actually ask you was on masks. That do masks really help? And if so, which masks should people wear when they step out? And also the age category, doctor, if you can explain, what is the age group under which masks are safe? You know, for people who are very old or people who have, you know, little children, how does the mask protocol work?
So two aspects, Rishika. How does it help and whether it can be tolerated? These are two separate aspects. So as I said, cloth mask is no good this surgical mask is no good as far as air pollution is concerned.
Right.
What helps in protecting from particulate matter is the N95, provided it is worn correctly. You should clip the thing around the nose, snugly fitting, nose and mouth covered, no air going from the sides, only breathing through the mask. But it increases the work of breathing, and you will only be able to hear for some time, after which you will have to relieve it and take a few deep breaths. Otherwise, you start feeling choked. You cannot wear it continuously for hours and hours. So that's one. How does it help? Now, who can help it? Now, people who are elderly, who already have some pre-existing chest condition, for example, if you're an asthmatic, you have COPD, these people do not tolerate this mask because it makes them feel choked and very uncomfortable.
Right.
Same way, very young children, if you try to put the mask, they don't tolerate it. They remove it. And most of the time you see the mask is hanging in front of the neck, which gives you no protection. So mask should not be proposed as a solution to pollution.
Absolutely.
Neither is air purifier a solution to pollution.
That was going to be my next question, doctor. Do you recommend air purifiers? Do they help at least mitigate the air quality inside the rooms? Or do you think that this is all a big fallacy?
Yeah, I'll answer it very clearly. Number one question, if anyone says in the country that air purifiers are a solution to pollution, the answer is a big no. N-O, no. It's not a solution to pollution. However, having made that statement, I would like to make a few exceptions because I myself am recommending this to my patients.
Right.
So how does an air purifier help? Air purifier is like an air conditioner. So there is a pump there, motor, which sucks in air from your room. It makes it pass through a mechanical filter, which is usually a HEPA filter, and then the air is thrown back into the room. So for this to be effective, it has to be a sealed, closed room. Your windows have to be shut, your doors have to be shut, and the air handling capacity of the unit has to match the size of your room, number one. And number two, your filter has to be proper, new, usable. Then it passes, it mechanically traps the particulate matter and gives you clean air.
All right.
But only as long as the windows and doors are closed.
I have 10 seconds, so this is probably just going to have to be a yes or no answer. Is it safe to exercise indoors? You've made it pretty clear that it's unsafe to exercise outdoors, not to exercise with a mask on. Is it safe to exercise indoors?
I would say even a strenuous exercise indoor should also be avoided these days, unless you have a means of ensuring that the air quality is good, because outside air only comes inside also.
All right. Well, doctor, thank you very much for your time. I'm afraid we're completely out of time. But like I said, I think you've answered some very crucial existential questions for us as we live in this air emergency. Thank you very much once again for sparing your time.
Bye.